sounds very professional, especially in some of the subjects which he has been speaking about. Now, I did have the choice, actually. I hope you agreed with my choice, because he had quite a few subjects that he could talk about, and of course, when he mentioned Nelson, well, I just had to go for it. But yes, I'd like to introduce our speaker, but I will say one thing, that is that when I first got into correspondence with our speaker, he made it quite clear, right, that how he felt about Rotarians, but actually saying that he doesn't charge Rotarians. Right? So I'd like to introduce our speaker, Ian Kirby.
Colin.
Well, thank you very much first for the hospitality, and I bring greetings from my own club, which is the Brindle Club. So far it's been great. I've met people I've met on my travels before from the door here, so that is quite interesting. As you can see, I am a City of London guy. I retired from my day job, lived in London all my life, about half a mile from Westminster Abbey and all of the environs of London. Went around the world in telecommunications, bringing engineers into London. They would bring their wives, say, where do we want to go now? When I retired, somebody suggested that I took the City of London badge, which I did. And that gave me the opportunity to meet people I'd never met and get into places that I would never have been able to get into. But the most interesting thing, I went back to my club and said exactly that. So the next week we get our Danish partner club, and there I am showing them around London. Never did on a tour in my life, but that's what Rotary is all about. So that's how Rotary encouraged me to do what I do now. My story starts, hopefully, there we go. My story starts with the man we call Nelson. But I was walking down Frinton High Street, and I walked into a charity bookshop and flicking through, and I found a book called The Burnham Boy. As I started flicking through, I was quite intrigued, and it is the sort of, how much did it cost me? Oh, look at that, 50p. And I started reading it, and I felt, we all know about Nelson and his battles, but do we really know about his family tree and why he was such a great man in the history of this country? And that little 50p book partly puts some of it in context. He had a father, Reverend Edmund Nelson. They were in Burnham, which is in North Norfolk, windy, by the coast. His father was a vicar, and his mother, who was more influential in his life, was Catherine Suckling. Now, the reason she was more influential is that Catherine's grandmother was the sister of the Prime Minister, the first Prime Minister of this country, Walpole. She also had two brothers, Maurice Suckling, and who was a naval captain, very important in the story, and William Suckling, who was in customs and excise. We're talking about Georgian times here, where posts in the government were very, very important. The Georgians had come through the Great Fire. Beyond the Great Fire, it was eating, drinking, and being merry time. They didn't respect the churches that had been built. Lots of the churches that Nelson's father were looking after were in disrepair. So that was the sort of scene he set. So his family, you've got the influential side, which is the Sucklings, the Catherine, they had the money. Nelson's family didn't have any money at all. So, you've got the vicar and his wife, and they had their first child, Edmund. Then they had their second child, Horatio. And Morris, named after the uncle. Then Susana, the first daughter. And it goes on a bit. And then William. Then Horatio, another Horatio. Edmund, Suckling, George, and finally Catherine. So there you are, up in this little village. Just let me say, the mother, from her firstborn to her lastborn, she died 17 years, exactly. So that was the family. The three that I've highlighted didn't last beyond very early childhood. They were born almost, died almost at birth. And that is why you got two Horatios. So that was the fact, thank you. So that was the family. But what was tragic, let's just go. Morris, the eldest son, got a job with his uncle William Suckling through influence in the customs and excise. Susana married a very wealthy trader, and she is quite important in Nelson's life. William, the eldest son that survived Nelson. Not a nice character, a greedy, greedy character. As we'll find out a bit later. Horatio, Lord Nelson. At 10 days old, they baptised him because they didn't think he would survive. He was so weak. And his godfather was the second Baron Walpole. And what a thing to do! You go for you're out in a dance in Bath, where the most of the Nelson family migrated to in the winter because it was too cold in Norfolk. She goes out for a dance. She goes outside, gets a cold, and dies 9 days later. Edmund didn't have anything about him at all, and he lived with his sister. And this was the interesting one. Suckling took holy orders and died at 32. It's private, as you can see, it's recorded. He died at a very convivial evening at a farmer's parlour. Imagine what his lifestyle was. Catherine married another. So the two women married wealthy local businessmen. But this is what happened. When Catherine was born, her mother dies 8 months later. And her mother, who was living with her looking after this big family, died a few months later, a few days later. So what we have was a large family that has lost its mother and its grandmother, and a reverend who's incapable of running the family affairs, no money. So it's all down to Susana, the eldest daughter. Horatio, our hero, was only 9 months old. So the story that I feel needs to be said is that he was always looking for that mother figure, and that is reflected in the story I'm going to tell. Those were the only three in the family that outlived Horatio. One son. He goes to school, Horatio goes to school, but at the age of 12 he writes to his uncle Morris and says, I want to join the Navy. I don't want to continue my schooling. So his uncle, who's just been asked by the Royal Navy to take a small fleet down to the Falklands, I wonder why. History repeated itself. The Spanish have occupied a British territory. So we're going to take a fleet down to the Falklands. The Royal Navy hit the Spaniards hear that the Royal Navy is on its way, and they abandon the Falklands. So they never actually reached the Falklands. But Nelson had written to his father by his brother to say, I want to join the Navy, and his uncle Morris had arranged for him to join the Navy at 12 years old. He was to report at Chatham, He goes to Chatham for his first ship. He gets to Chatham and his uncle is on leave. There's nobody there for 3 days. He's on this ship and nobody knows he's here. But he gets the job basically as the captain's steward on his first opportunity. And he sees, after a year working on his uncle's ship, his uncle suggests that he takes a voyage on the merchant ship. And so he spent 14 months going to and from the West Indies, and that is where he learned his sailing skills. It was not with the Royal Navy. When he finished that 14 months, he hated the Royal Navy, the way it was run, but it was where his early years running to the West Indies, that is where he learned his skills. The next adventure in 1773, he sees in the paper there's a expedition going to the Arctic. And last night, if you've got a chance, go to the Royal Maritime Greenwich in Royal Maritime Greenwich in Greenwich. They've got an exhibition on Franklin's looking for the Northwest Passage, just opened today. A really good story to be told. So he sees that there is a geological society run by the Royal Navy, controlled by the Royal Navy. So he applies. They said, "Go away, young boy. You're only 15. We've got no need for you." He said, "But I've got these skills. I'll be the best coxswain of the small boats you've ever had." He influences them, and he actually goes to the Arctic in 1773. At 15 years old, it's an adventure. So what does he do? They're stuck in the ice. And he's asked with it to get a small boat out and start chipping the ice away so they can break through on the ice. There's a fog one evening, and he says to one of his mates of the same age as him, "You know what I want to do? I want to go and shoot a polar bear." Which he does. They take a gun, the two of them, at night in the fog, and they find a bear. The captain realises they've gone and the fog starts to clear, and they see that these two youngsters are in trouble. They tried to shoot the polar bear, and the reason they wanted to shoot the polar bear is they wanted to take the skin home as a blanket for his father. So they raised the musket, and apparently the musket didn't fire. The captain happens to see what's happening and fires a cannon and scares the polar bear away. We might not have had a hero if that hadn't happened. So that was an early experience. And then he was back in the Royal Navy as a 16-year-old, and he was going to the East Indies where he caught malaria, and he was very, very ill. And he was a sickly person anyway. He always got seasick when he went on the ship. So this was the beginning of his story. He was upgraded to an acting lieutenant, and as you can see, in 1771, he goes to the Royal Navy Commissioning Board. He's done his exams, he's up to get a commission, and on the board happens to be his uncle. So guess what? He gets his commission. But in fairness, his uncle did not tell the other members of the board that they were linked in any way. So his commission comes at 17 years old, lieutenant commander, and captain at 20. I'm running through this just to give you an idea of where Nelson is, because I want to get on to the more personal life. But he's married before 1794, and he's got all his arms and legs and everything. But as soon as he's married, he disappears from this country, and in Corsica he loses his right eye. He has the Battle of St. Vincent, where he made his name. He was a very junior captain of a ship, last of the line attacking the Spanish. The wind's in the wrong direction, the whole British fleet is being pushed in the wrong way. He's at the back of the line, realises what's going on, turns round, and the Spanish fleet is coming towards him, and he's sort of in his little warship with all these big ships right in front of him. It's like walking out on a zebra crossing when nobody's going to stop. So he's there and he starts firing at them. That gives the chance to the rest of the Royal Naval ships to turn round and attack the fleet. So he was disobeying orders, and he expected to be court-martialed. But because he saved the day for the Royal Navy, he got a Knight of the Bath. In Tenerife, he was lost his left arm. He should never have been there. He was with the Royal Marines. It was a boarding party in Tenerife. He goes up on the beach. A shot goes, a piece of shrapnel hits him in the arm, and he has to have his arm amputated. But at 39 years old, he still made his name. He becomes commander of the Mediterranean fleet, and the reason he had shown his skills of leadership. In 1798, the Battle of Nye, where he really made his name, he's searching the Mediterranean, and he calls in at Naples, and he meets the British ambassador in Naples, Sir William Hamilton, and his wife. And he's searching for the Napoleon's fleet that have they've just had an adventure in Africa, and they're bringing the fleet back from Africa back to France, and he's looking to disrupt this. He searching for months, but he finally finds them in the Bay of Aqaba on the mouth of the Nile in the evening. Well, traditional battles on the sea were two lots of opponents lining up against each other and firing the hell out of each other. So he's seen them anchor in the bay at night. They don't even know they're there. So they go into the bay, shoot the whole lot up, and Napoleon has lost his whole fleet and has to abandon his army. Another risky but infamous attack. So he gets the peer of the realm for that. But he also gets the Duke of Bronte, which is because he's actually saved the states around the Mediterranean, Naples, for example. He gets the Duke of Bronte, which was an unofficial. It wasn't recognised by the British government. It didn't go down too well. But it's the big.
Can I interrupt a second? Does anybody with a car registration FYE? F for Freddie, Y for.
Yeah, it's fine.
FYE.
No, that's all right. So from the Battle of the Nile, he's got more and more gongs and peerages. And then in 1801, he has to go to the Baltic because the Russians and the French have got an alliance together to try and stop the trade on this country. And his job is to find out how big the fleet is. And he finds the fleet in Copenhagen, but Copenhagen harbour, you couldn't attack with your great big battleships because you just couldn't get them into the harbour. So he is asked by the flag admiral to take a small observation fleet into Copenhagen. He takes his small fleet and finds exactly the same that he found in the Nile. They're all asleep, they're all anchored up, and he shoots them all to pieces. But he was told not to do it. And that is the famous time when he said, "I do not see this signal," when he put his telescope to his blind eye. So that's the sort of man he was. From that, he was made a Viscount. So that gives you a quick run-up of how he got all his gongs, and he was a man that needed these accolades. He needed to be loved, and this all comes back to, motherless wanted this recognition. But what I found was the most interesting thing, again about this mother thing, was his love affairs. We all know about one of them. At 60, he was in Quebec, and he was ashore, and he met Mary Simpson, 16 years old, and in 1782. He falls madly in love with her. He's told to go aboard his ship. His ship is leaving. He goes aboard, but he can't leave this young woman. So he rows back to the harbour. He's spotted by somebody ashore that knows who he is. They convinced him to go back on his ship, otherwise he'd be court-martialed and that would be the end of his career. Again, we would have lost a famous admiral. He was totally in love with this 16-year-old, but he was pushed back on the ship. Miss Andrews. We've got to the situation in between the American War of Independence and the French Revolution, and it's time for Nelson to learn French, because he felt that his next battle is going to be against the French, and if he's going to be captured, he might as well speak the language. His mother hated the French, and it was inbuilt into him that he hated the French, but he went to France to learn French in this period where there was no turmoil. He meets Miss Andrews a year later, after this great event in Quebec. He meets Miss Andrews and he falls in love with Miss Andrews. He's got no money, so he writes to his uncle to say, can you loan me a dowry of £1,000 so that I can marry this lady? And his uncle says yes. So he goes back to Miss Andrews, who's a vicar's daughter, and says, will you marry me? And she said, not on your life. I'm not taking that sort of risk. But we still don't know if his uncle got his dowry back. This is probably the most intriguing one. During this period in the West Indies, the American War of Independence is over, the British Navy is out in the Caribbean and those areas, potentially trying to stop pirating or the trading between the Americans and the British merchants in the West Indies because of the tax situation. Of course there was a lot going on, and the merchants and the traders didn't want any interference with the Royal Navy. But Nelson was a stickler for rules and regulations, so he made himself very unpopular in the Caribbean by stopping ships trading with British ports. He meets Mary Monterey. Now there's a little bit of a problem there because she's married to the governor. Clearly they had an affair, but the governor is sent back with his wife back to the UK, Britain, and he finds that the governor dies while he's in England 6 months later. And all Nelson wants to do is dash back to England and propose to her. Again, we would have lost our commission, our famous admiral. But he's back in St Nevis, and he meets Francis Nesbitt. He's looking after an entourage of presentation. The British are putting on a big show. They're coming all the way down the American coast, and they're in St Nevis, and Nelson, as a young officer, is asked to take care of the Prince, which is the future King William IV, and look after him. They're having a right old time, because every time the Prince puts his foot on land, everybody puts a big dance and a big ball, and there's loads of women and all sorts of things going on. So it was quite nice. And he meets Frances Nesbitt. Now she is a widow with a son of a wealthy
Reverend.
That's it. She's got a 5-year-old son. The future King George IV says, do the honourable thing to Frances, marry her, I will be your best man. And that is actually what happened. He married Frances Nesbitt. At this time, he's still got an eye and an arm. In attendance was the Duke of Clarence, the future. He marries her, and then he's put on half pay because there's no need for all these ships in the Royal Navy until the French execute their king. French Revolution coming up. After 5 years of being laid off, and France is coming back from Antigua to live in Norfolk, cold Norfolk, and they're there for 5 years. Nelson is given the command of his first command because of the situation with the French Revolution. Emma Hamilton. This was another book that I found in my famous charity shop. If you're ever in Frinton, go to the St Francis Hospice library. They've got some fantastic books there. And recently, again at the National Maritime Museum, there's been a whole exhibition on Emma Hamilton. She was an incredible lady. Very beautiful, as you can see. Romney, the artist, painted her about 70 or 80 times. He was 14. And what had happened, after his Battle of the Nile, he'd got hit on the head, he'd gone back to Naples. Emma Hamilton was there with William Hamilton, 34 years older than her, and obviously she looked after him, and they had a love affair. Her history. She comes from Lancashire as Emma Hart. She's got nothing. She comes to London to work in the, to be a nanny actually, but we're not sure how far she went on that and all this various dubious situations. But she meets Sir Harry, who allows her to come into his household as a beautiful woman, who he then introduces to Romney, the artist, and he's her main model. But she also brings her mother and her grandmother, and they're living with Sir Harry until she becomes pregnant by him, and he kicks her out. As you do. And Charles Grenville, a friend of Harry, takes her in with all the best intentions. She has the baby there. Charles Grenville looks after her. But Charles is running out of money. He needs to marry somebody with money. So he concocts with William Hamilton an idea of why shouldn't he will, that is Charles Grenville, he's going to visit Hamilton in Naples, Sicily, where they now moved to Sicily. They're going to visit them, he says. You go ahead and I'll follow you. Of course, Emma and her family go to Naples with Sir William, and Charles never goes. And that is how he got rid of Emma. But what had happened, Emma, from being just an ordinary lass from Lancashire, as we know, she learned with these two guys how to present herself at court, how to speak different languages, and how the etiquette of the time was. She was beautiful and very accessible, but she was clever. She learned what needed to be learned to get on in society. So with Sir William Hamilton, from the Battle of the Nile, Nelson arrives at the front door with a damaged head. She looks after him. They fall in love with each other, and they live basically almost as a threesome. So William has to come back home. William has to come back home. So they all travel instead of coming by ship, they travel across Europe, avoiding France, of course, and they're fated all the way through to France. But remember, and this is Nelson as well, but remember Nelson has been away from home for 3.5 years from his wife, and he's obviously having this affair with Emma Hamilton, and they return to England. And while they are on their way home at that point, before they got to England, Emma is pregnant with a daughter of Nelson. But Nelson and Emma Hamilton never recognised in any paperwork that that was their daughter. They concocted a captain of a ship, they gave her a second name, and they were down on her birth certificate as her godparents. So they never actually accepted that Horatio, the child, was Nelson's daughter. And there were secret letters between them, coded letters to say how is the godchild, and there was a big pretence. So they returned to England, which was quite interesting because then he meets his wife with a pregnant sidekick. Very shortly, he separates from his wife and goes to live in London in William Hamilton's premises in London with Emma. So there's a big stink about it. The royalty that were fating him all of a sudden put him to one side. They didn't want to know. Because by this time, Nelson and Lady Nelson, because she had the title, were the people that royalty aligned themselves to. So the baby arrives, and then we have the Battle of Copenhagen, which I mentioned before, and he gets even more platitudes of greatness, and it sort of all simmers down. So William dies, and then they had bought a house in Wimbledon, Merton Place, so they were living together. So William dies, so they are living as a couple in Merton, which it makes sense because that was on the road from London to Portsmouth where the ships were. And then we get the Battle of Trafalgar. The Battle of Trafalgar takes place, and we know that Nelson is killed. Nelson is killed, and there's great celebrations that we have saved this nation. And the biggest celebrations were in the City of London because that saved the trading of this nation. Because the whole idea was to stop us trading with the rest of the world. So there were a big celebration. It took from October, when Nelson was killed, to get his body back to this country to January. Because the ship Victory was so badly damaged, that pulled in to Gibraltar, and then it came round. But the body was taken by a small frigate and brought back. But it didn't get back to Greenwich until January 1806. And this was what happened was, at Greenwich there was supposed to be a guard of honour of his men on the board his ship. And that was it was all due to arrive at 12 o'clock, but there was a big storm off the Nore at the entry to the Thames, and the ship couldn't come. So at 6 o'clock, it was rum ration time. So all the guard of honour disappeared, closed the gates. Nelson's body arrives at 8 o'clock, and there's nobody there to let him in. This is not a way to treat our hero. He's laying in state in Painted Hall, and I just dropped back here in my history. I lived in Wimbledon, I travelled to central London for my job, I became a City of London guide, and I'd never been to Greenwich. And the first time I went to Greenwich and went inside the Painted Hall, it just it was just incredible. And at this moment, you should go and pay £10 because they've got £4 million to renovate the paintings of the ceiling, and they've got scaffoldings, and you can go up on the scaffoldings and you can actually touch the paintings to see how detailed they are. All the models, you can see, a bit awful, but the paintings of bodies, you can actually see the hairs and the armpits. If you really want something different to do, go to the painted hall and see those, go on the ceiling tour. It's open for another year. So anyway, his body lies in states. The whole nation wants to celebrate his great victories. He gets a royal, his body's interred in a sarcophagus, which wasn't made for him. It was actually made for Wolsey, Cardinal Wolsey. But he fell out of fame with Henry VIII. This coffin was used for Nelson, and it was towed from the Admiralty to St Paul's Cathedral, where it is today. The interesting thing is, as it got to Ludgate Hill, there was a big, the horses pulling this very heavy carriage couldn't get out Ludgate Hill. They started slipping. So the Royal Navy men attached ropes to the cortege and pulled it up the hill. And that is why we still get, for a national Churchill and Thatcher, you would have seen Royal Navy pulling the actual cortege, and that was from here. Emma pursues a pension. Society is still on the side of Lady Nelson. And you remember there was only one son left out of the whole family, William. He is the one that if he petitions and has a good, he's the one that's going to take all the titles and all the pensions. Though Hamilton is now Lady Hamilton, she gets no pension from the government at all, but she's getting a lot of sailors coming to her and saying, look, we're destitute, we're poor, and she's helping them, giving her money away. She's one of these people that easy come, easy go money, and she's in debt. The government will not give her a pension. They don't want anything to do with it. So she doesn't get a pension. She's arrested for debt. So we've got this ambassador's wife, an incredible lady that's looked after our hero, but because of her relationship with this hero and his marriage status, she gets nothing from the government. She's arrested for debt. A few of her, she's taken into Newgate prison, but a few of her colleagues get enough money to get her out of prison. She cannot continue living in this country because she's got no money, so she flees to Calais. Emma dies in Calais, a pauper, and she's in a pauper's grave. Horatio, 14 years later, returns to live with her sister. But that was quite interesting because Emma still did not recognise her daughter as her daughter. She refused to accept that she was her daughter. But her daughter continued to look after Emma. So there was a really interesting bond there. She took, even at that age, she took, went with her mother and looked after her mother. And her mother became a drunkard and destitute. After her mother dies, she comes back to live with Nelson's sister, Susana. The story takes a similar turn. Horatio Thompson, born 1801, marries a reverend. And she has children.
Right.
So the story takes a full circle. I just want to show you, just to finish there, if I may, just want to show you a brief clip, if I may.
This woman is known to the world. Look closely. Do you recognize her? Listen to her story, then condemn her, if you can.
Shame? I'm not ashamed. There's nothing to be ashamed of. I was young. I was stupid. I believed in men and their promises. But Charles knew about me before he took me into the house.
Plan to play upon your vanity. And she's quite capable of declaring you the father of our child.
Francis, control yourself.
As long as I live, I shall be your wife.
We've been living in a dream. And now we are faced with the truth. How ugly it is. How terribly ugly.
Here moves drama the screen has seldom known. A daring, intimate story of a glorious woman fighting the irresistible power of love. With lovely Vivian Lee in a worthy challenge to her Academy Award-winning role as Scarlet O'Hara, Laurence Olivier.
Don't.
They don't make them like that anymore. just the one thing that is important at the end of this, William, his eldest son, the only son, grabbed the pensions, and the pensions were paid down the line right until the era of Margaret Thatcher, and they were stopped.
We've got a couple of questions we can give. I'm sure you will do questions. Anybody? Questions?
That's good. I think that was a very inclusive.
Thank you. In that case, I'll ask Chief to go to questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, what an insight to one of our heroes. The only recollection I have of seeing the man was when he was standing on top of the column in Trafalgar Square. Other than that, it's a fascinating story. It's something that probably will come back onto British television, I feel sure, in the not too distant future. One of the channels, and vivid Technicolor. But it couldn't be more vivid than the description you've given this morning. So, Ian, thank you very much indeed. Congratulations to Rotarium on knowing his stuff. Thank you very much.
Any other business? No? I remind you of the apologies book, the menu on the website. Please be abstended for